Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. My guest today is Michael Keppel, and we're doing a series about various case studies. He has over 30 years of experience and primarily focused on technology, manufacturing, and service organizations in one of his two companies, which is he founded eCapital Financing, which helps startups in the LA area and Western New York regions, which is important information if you're getting into this space and valuing intellectual property, is understanding some of the nuances and how it's owned and how it's partnered. Again, a 10% piece that's connected to a university is a big deal, at least as you have to address it, right?
Yeah.
But we've thrown out a lot of things, including royalty rates, including cash flow, including, not all the words that we need to talk about in this, but like if you're looking at intellectual property, what valuation methods are you typically using, and how are you, what were some of the things that you had to consider in this situation that either moved you in that valuation method, or what did you need to know within that method that was really some of the tangible pieces of the equation?
Yeah, I know. As business valuators, we have the three legs: income, market, and asset. They're still very germane with regard to intellectual property, but a different spin. For example, the income approach, we're taking a look, as you briefly mentioned, Melissa. What's the royalties for that? And I would say, from a personal perspective, I think that's the number one challenge with inventors who want to take their product to the market and do all that. You might be better off just sitting back and just getting the royalties from the product and let some of the big boys do it, mass produce it, and take care of it, and you just collect your quarterly check. Too often they try to build it themselves, not only invent it, and it's a totally different skill set. The other thing is with regards to marketability, you really got to do a market analysis of what this product or device could be used for. And you have to have a realistic assumption of what it could be used for on a global basis. And then the third is with regards to the asset. It's hard to do the asset. One of the key things, and with most IP valuation, you have to look at the replacement cost. Okay, you got the patents. I took 3-4 years to develop. I spend this money. That's part of the asset. And it's the combination and weighting factor of those three that really plays out. But lately, putting more and more emphasis on medical devices. It's different on software, on medical devices, on the royalties. What is the real royalty method that you can get? There's a lot of, as we know, a lot of large international medical companies that are very, very aggressive in acquiring these patents and the royalties, especially for a university or especially for someone who just has the patent. You're better off getting that 10% without owning the whole thing and just let these big boys take it to a global response and get it out there on the market.
But that's still a process of finding, you're almost finding different investors, different people that help you along the way. And the valuation of it, like from my standpoint, having done valuations for 20 years, the valuation of intellectual property in any capacity is more subjective. It's more, hypothetical. It's more making some assumptions, DCFs and option pricing models and WAC and all of these things.
You hit the nail on the head. It's much more subjective, Melissa, than valuing a normal manufacturing company. I had the fun of dealing with and doing intellectual property valuation for music down in Nashville. Now, I have a 10-year. So what a song's going to be worth or what anything's worth is very, very subjective. I mean, who knows why some artists do so well, others don't. But those are the things that it is extremely subjective. And there are processes and things you have to go through for each industry. But Intellectual property, there's a lot of soft assumptions that have to be made to it. And it's not unusual, not unusual at all, Melissa, on these situations, much more so than other valuations, to have a range.
Mhm.
In your reports, the range is between, in this case study I'm talking about now, the range is between 25 million and 33 million. And it depends on A, B, and C.
Mhm.
Because it's so subjective, though.
Yeah. And are you really, you know, do you feel like IP valuations are more laborious and more in depth than other valuations or require more understanding? Because it's not just as easy as going to like a royalty rate or a royalty database, right? And then picking the right pieces. It's really being able to defend that process and
Yeah,
defend your valuation.
that process is critical to defend it. I would say in the intellectual property, it is a much lengthier report, much more detailed with all the assumptions that you're making. You can't just say, I picked this from the Wall Street Journal on these 6 companies that are in your niche market. That just doesn't work that way with intellectual property. So you really have to document your process and go through it. But it's much more challenging professionally to go through it and do that in that approach than just to have a database with the answers out there with minimal assumptions versus IP, where the assumptions are at least twice as much as that and have such a significant impact.
Well, and what do you think, like if we're talking about this particular case study and we have a medical device company, we have that, they have a date of death or, a certain date that they're valuing this for the estate purposes or probate or whatever it is, or a buy sell, somebody's got to
Mhm.
still own this property. What do you think is really important in an IP valuation to have, like the data, the information, or what significantly can move the needle? Like, is this, are we still in an estate valuation that the discounts are the biggest issue, or what are you seeing is really important in these?
In this specific case study, the estate discounts and everything was important, especially with regards to the individual who filed the patent. The other thing is critically important for us, and we work side by side with an attorney we have on our team who does nothing but sophisticated IP. And he'll read it, I'll put together my notes, he'll go through the patent from a legal perspective, the good, the bad, and the ugly, especially if it's an international patents as well. And that lays as the foundation for doing that. Ironically, though, one of the key things I've noticed over the years is whoever writes the patent has a big impact on the value of the patent. There are some firms that are brilliant at what they do and can take a device and really expand its patent and marketability in an outstanding professional way. And there are others who just don't do that. You want to find someone who specializes not only in IP, which it is, but IP of that device. If it's music, there's the copyrights. If it's medical device, there's firms that just do, there's software. There's a lot of firms that you want to get somebody who has that and who has that experience to go through that process with you.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the reasons why people will shy away from that space because it's a much more complex valuation. It's a much more complex process.
Yeah.
Like, tell us a little bit more about how long it took you to kind of go through this process, or what were some of the sticking points that made it a little bit more difficult?
Yeah, going through the process in this case probably took about time wise about 45 days once we got all the information. The thing that made it most difficult was some of the international patents associated with this one. Although the U.S. patent looked very good, the international patents were an add-on, and that was most of the market And I would also say in the estate, at a dimension of complexity that the family members, uh, some were very helpful and others weren't, as sometimes we see in these estate matters. And I think if they had to do it all over again, our end client, that they would have selected an attorney who fully understand the nuances of this process.
Now, what happened at the end of this case study that you think is an important learning lesson, or, an important concept to understand if you're going to be doing valuations of intellectual property?
Well, because there's so many assumptions involved, Melissa, and we talked about those a few moments ago, and there are quite a few, is to take a good drafted report and share it with everybody. Validate your assumptions, all sides of the family. The medical devices, the original law firm, for example, who wrote the patents, other people have a stake in the ground with regards to business valuation. If it's M&A, have them take a look at it and review your assumptions, and because they may be able to fine tune the assumptions or to set you straight. And I'm going to say, Michael, maybe this assumption isn't applicable for this product because of A, B, and C. The other thing that we bought in on this device is a group of cardiac surgeons who I sat down with and say, okay, here's the device I'm taking a look at. They wanted to replace this medical procedure. Is it going to work? I'm not an MD, but these guys are MDs. They say, well, Michael, here's some of the challenges you have, and here's some of the things you've got to expect. Surprisingly, with medical devices, there's one hurdle that people need to be very cognizant of. Whatever the medical community learned in medical school, that's going to be the solution they'll probably use in the rest of their career. So if you come even with a better, quicker mousetrap, they may not feel comfortable with it. They may be worried about litigation. It's a very litigious environment. And all these other factors have pronounced impact on the rolling out of any medical device. It could be the best mousetrap. That's why it's paramount that you get the input of some renowned specialist in that area. Say, here's what you use it for, here's the pros, and here's the cons, and this is what you have to do to get over that hurdle.
Now, what was some of the impact of the owner being deceased in this process, and how much time and effort did you have to kind of be concerned about that piece of it as well?
Yeah. Given the role that she played with regards to the patent and everything else, I would say this probably reduced the overall value because of her death by 40 to 50%. She was the rainmaker. She had all the connections. She worked with the medical communities. She had the FDA. She was really the key driver behind it. And, it just stopped. There was no succession plan, nothing along those lines. She just passed, and the next day the family didn't know what to do with it, and the company hadn't rolled this out yet to its full potential. They just made a lot of promises and commitments, and they're still just beyond the prototype stage, so there wasn't much that they could do without her. So we had to take a look at it from that aspect, and it was a significant discount as her loss.
Yeah, like I just think that valuations in this space are so complicated, and it's the same with a startup. It's the same with a pre-market company, that you're making assumptions about the future that really, other than having a crystal ball, you have to support in some capacity. So for valuation people who are kind of, and I also think it's a very lucrative area. There's not a lot of professionals that really specialize in valuations of IP. I know a handful of them around the country, and and you have to be able to support it and defend it in some capacity. So if other valuation people are out there saying, this is a space I want to get into, or I've already been doing a couple, because I did a lot more when I was working for a big accounting firm. We were doing fair value, which I feel like is very similar, like a fair value calculation or adjustment for, goodwill impairment and things like that, is very similar analyses, but completely different, like theoretically some of the same projections based on, the person, the IP, the technology, the this, the that. What would you say to be mindful of and to really focus on if you're going to do this type of work? What areas do you have to make sure that you really understand it to be able to do this type of work?
I think you really truly have to understand the underlying business aspect of it, probably much more so than any other business valuation process, whether it's from a technical perspective or have experience in the medical device community and the medical device companies. Being able to say, I walked on that side of the fence before and I understand where you're coming from, and adds a lot of credibility, and the true numbers, not only the true numbers, but the market, what has to go through, the difference between when you get to FDA and how to roll it out and deal. These are all challenges that most startups drastically underestimate.
Mm-hmm.
They could have the best mousetrap in the world, Melissa, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to market it, let alone try to market it on a global environment, going through the FDA and all the other hurdles that medical devices have to go through, and justifiably so in many cases.
Yeah. And we have a company that we know that is a medical apparatus. And now, as they go and get funding, because they're in that FDA the process, and they're kind of at the final stages, they have to do one more final test and everything's good. What sort of impact on valuation does being in the middle of the FDA process really lend to when you have such an unknown? I mean, obviously, the closer you are to getting it, the risk goes down, but there's still a lot of risk in there. Like how can somebody quantitate that and quantify it and support it? Or are these just a lot of the areas that you have to have a basis and understanding of?
Going in the United States, going through the FDA process has a lot of characteristics of going to a casino in Las Vegas. It gets very expensive, and you don't know what you're going to walk out with. I'll give you an example. Is that I know it was a typical situation earlier this decade because of COVID, but you could be, as you alluded to, closing to the end of the process. Well, if something else comes on top of it that they consider much more important and more common that needs to be addressed, guess what? You just went down quite a bit down the stairs. So you're not at the middle or at the tail end anymore. And just because you get the tail end, going through the cleaning up all their comments and everything takes time. I've in the business world that with medical, people drastically underrate the cost it is to go through the FDA process. And people who are thinking about doing it, get a professional firm to walk you through that process. Don't try to do it or yourself, or just have your attorney fill out the forms. No. There are specialty firms that just will walk you through the FDA process. And I really think you need someone to quarterback that. Otherwise, you're spending more and more time. The average device going through the FDA process is about 18 months now, which is getting to be good. It was 2 years ago, it was almost 3 years because of the pandemic and everything stopped. But it's a very, very expensive process, very expensive.
Well, yeah, and a lot of times they're trying to raise money to get through, a final round or anything, like, and some additional things that the FDA, because the FDA can be like, oh, go work on this and come back. And we promise that we'll approve it at that point. And so it's kind of interesting because getting an expert could also maybe allow you to piggyback on some other technology that gets you through the FDA a little bit faster. But what I hear more often is that when they go to get the funding, the private equity or the angel investors are really, really pressing them in their risk. And I think if they had a valuator such as you that was able to quantify and talk about the risk, but actually also be discussing it with investors, That's just an additional opportunity they have to present a united front and to support this valuation, because the private equity is always going to say, I don't like your valuation. Like,
Oh,
they just
yeah.
don't want to pay it.
Right. But because of that risk, until you get the official blessing, you're paying dearly for that. So if you need some money during that process, so if you go into the FDA process, make sure you have a lot of dry powder, because if you're going through that process and you need money, that's going to be very dear and extremely expensive money.
Yes, because they have the upper hand.
That's
Okay,
right.
so a couple of the things that I do want to highlight as we kind of round this out. And again, we're going to have the study available, and you can reach out to Michael. And there's a couple ways to reach out to Michael, either on LinkedIn or through his website. But I want to talk about this a little bit more, because these valuations, like if you're a solo practitioner and you have the bandwidth, that is phenomenal, right? But a lot of times who you're competing against are bigger firms, or, with a little bit more depth in their valuation experience. And I want to talk about the fact that you have a significant number of valuation people working with you and for you, and just talk a little bit about, your firm and what kind of capabilities you have, because again, there could be valuators that are out there that want to get more into this space, and you could also help facilitate that. I think you've helped other valuation people, work through the rankings and even hired them or mentored them, and that's a great resource as well. So tell us more about, like, you actually have a pretty good sized firm in order to do these types of in-depth analyses that you can still do them in 45 days. But for normal of us, this could take months and months and months to do this process.
Yeah, we have a bench, and our team consists of 17 professionals, valuators. Obviously, we have the marketing, accounting, etc. But we have those valuators on the team, and they do a lot of this work. We do, and especially myself, as the chairman for the New York Society of CPAs, I do a lot of speaking and write a lot of papers on this, and I'm always willing to help people out. Be careful when you go through the process, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help. For example, we don't have any cannabis experience and come across a cannabis client. I will call people who I know in this space and say, here, if the client still wants me to be involved, I'll be glad, or I can turn it over to someone who's an expert in this area. You can't be all things to all people. You get in trouble when you think you can, especially if it has some unique challenges like IP, that you don't want to be playing with this, because number one, it's going to get critiqued by many players. And how you write the assumptions, reports are a little bit different, more inclusive. Have someone go through a mentor with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because, like, I've worked for all the big firms, and the templates and, like, seeing all of the work. I think what you just said is key. And you can be academically capable of doing these valuations. You could have templates that are built by billionaire companies, right? Like, I had the best templates, I had the best everything. But the reality is, if you don't understand the industry and you don't understand the nuances, right, then that's really where the complexity comes. It's like almost like you don't know what you're missing. You don't know what you're getting wrong. And it has been a big reason why I've stayed out of this space. Because I think that you really do have to have a base understanding. So as you see the valuation community, do you think that we're moving towards more specialization? And
No, Melissa, there's a very aggressive approach right now, because you don't know what you don't know.
yeah.
So there's a very aggressive approach right now, and both in the American Society of Appraisers and in the CPA community, to have a designation just for intellectual property valuators. Just as there is for appraisers of real estate, is not the same thing that we do as valuators. So they are going forward and trying to see the interest of it right now. Obviously, some of these organizations don't want to take that approach, and others say, okay, right, it's so specialized now that we need to designate people who have that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, and I think like with any valuation topic, are you passionate about it? Do you enjoy it? Is it something that you desire to be advanced in? Because that's really what it takes in some of these. Just like divorce, just like bankruptcy, these are nuanced areas, and we're going to be talking through these various types of issues in case studies. So if people have questions about intellectual property valuations, they can reach out to us. We're more than willing to talk about other types of case studies, and we will continue to talk about them. And we might even have guests. We don't know. It's in its infancy, but we absolutely want some input about what types of valuations people want to know about, and we can present on them. Do you have any parting advice or information to talk about these case
No,
studies or anything
no.
else?
Thank you very much, Melissa. I think looking forward to discussing these case studies, and if people need more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Always glad to help out fellow professionals.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate your time and your commitment to the valuation industry. And we will be back next time with some more information about another case study. So thank you, Michael.
Have a great day. Thank you.